The last day of school had always been the kind of night kids remembered for years, a mixture of freedom, adrenaline, and the electric buzz of summer vacation finally beginning. For Ryan, a 17-year-old junior at a small-town high school in Ohio, that night felt especially alive. He and his two best friends, Caleb and Dylan, had stayed late after the final bell, wandering the hallways when most students had already gone home. Teachers were packing up their classrooms, and the janitors were beginning their slow sweep through the building, but the boys wanted one last thrill before summer began. There were always stories about their school, about how part of the building had been constructed on old farmland where something tragic had happened decades ago. Some kids whispered about lights flickering on in locked rooms, about voices echoing through the gym when it was empty. Ryan never believed in that stuff. But when Dylan suggested they sneak back inside later that night after the graduation party, Ryan couldn't shake the idea. It was close to midnight when the three of them pulled into the empty parking lot. The building stood silent against the dark sky, the windows reflecting nothing but the thin slice of moonlight. Ryan's pulse quickened as they climbed out of Dylan's car, each step crunching loudly on the gravel. The front doors were locked, of course, but Caleb knew one of the side doors by the gym didn't always close all the way. He was right. The door gave with a creak that echoed far too loudly in the empty night, and suddenly they were inside, swallowed by the familiar yet unnerving silence of the school. Without the hum of fluorescent lights and the bustle of students, the building felt alien, almost hostile. Their footsteps bounced off the lockers as they whispered and laughed nervously, their voices trailing off into the dark hallways. They decided to explore the second floor, where the classrooms lined up like hollow mouths in the dim glow of the exit signs. Ryan couldn't help but feel a creeping unease. Every corner looked darker than it should have been, every shadow stretched longer. Dylan cracked jokes to keep the mood light, but his voice sounded thinner than usual, betraying that he felt it too. They passed the library, its wide glass windows reflecting their movements. For a second, Ryan swore he saw something standing between the rows of books, something darker than the darkness itself, but when he blinked, it was gone. He told himself it was just his imagination, but his heart beat harder, pushing against his chest like a drum. They made their way toward the old science wing, the one teachers always said needed repairs. The air grew colder there, almost damp, and the silence seemed to thicken. Caleb's flashlight beam cut across the peeling paint and old classroom doors, each marked with numbers that looked faded with age. The boys tried the handles, most of them locked, until one door swung open with a groan. Inside, the desks were still neatly lined, and the chalkboard bore faint marks of lessons long erased. But there was something strange about the room. Papers were scattered on the floor as though someone had rifled through them recently, and one of the windows had been taped shut with heavy black tape. Dylan joked about it being the perfect scene for a horror movie, but his laugh died halfway, leaving a silence that pressed against all of them. Ryan felt a chill crawl up his spine as he stepped farther inside. He glanced at the chalkboard again and froze. Words had been written there, faint but visible when the flashlight caught them at the right angle, "Don't stay." His throat tightened. None of them spoke for a long second, their breaths loud in the still air. Caleb finally muttered that it had to be some prank by kids last year, but even he sounded unsure. The air in the room felt heavier, almost suffocating, and Ryan had the overwhelming sense that they weren't alone. He thought he heard footsteps behind them, slow and deliberate, but when he spun around, the hallway was empty. The three of them backed out of the room, trying to laugh it off, but their pace quickened as they headed back down the hallway. Ryan's ears picked up the faintest sound, like a locker slamming shut in the distance. Dylan asked if they heard it too, and when both Ryan and Caleb nodded, the joking stopped entirely. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by what unmistakably sounded like breathing just around the corner. Ryan's pulse roared in his ears as the flashlight flickered in Caleb's hand, dimming for a split second. When it steadied, they all gasped, because at the far end of the hallway, something was standing there. It wasn't a teacher, and it wasn't a student. Its outline was human, but it was far too still, far too dark, and as soon as the light hit it, it seemed to vanish into the air. Ryan's legs felt like stone, but his instinct screamed at him to run. Ryan's breath came in shallow bursts as his sneakers squeaked against the linoleum, his body propelling him forward before his mind could process what had just happened. Caleb and Dylan were right behind him, their footsteps thunderous in the silence of the school. None of them spoke, they didn't need to. The shadow they had seen, or thought they had seen, was burned into all of their minds. Ryan's chest heaved, his heart slamming against his ribs as he glanced over his shoulder. The hallway stretched behind them, empty, but he swore the air seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from asphalt. He pushed the thought away and kept running until they reached the stairwell that led back toward the gym. Caleb skidded to a stop at the top of the stairs. "Wait," he hissed, holding up his hand. Ryan nearly collided into him, grabbing the railing to steady himself. Dylan's voice cracked as he whispered, "What the hell are we waiting for? Let's just get out." But Caleb's face had drained of color. He pointed down the stairwell. The door at the bottom, the one that should have led them back to the gym exit, was already open. Slowly, it creaked wider, as if someone were pulling it from the other side. The sound echoed upward, low and drawn out, until the door stood completely ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Ryan's stomach flipped. They hadn't opened that door. They hadn't even gone near it. Dylan swore under his breath, his hands trembling as he gripped the railing. "Screw this. I'm done. We're leaving right now." But none of them moved down the stairs. Something about the open door felt wrong, like stepping through it would mean crossing into someplace they weren't supposed to be. The silence stretched painfully until Ryan finally said, "Let's just try the other way. Back through the library. There's another exit there." Caleb nodded quickly, and the three of them bolted in the opposite direction, away from the stairwell and the yawning black doorway that seemed to be waiting for them. The hallways twisted and turned, each one looking more identical than the last. Ryan's sense of direction faltered, panic making every corner feel unfamiliar. The familiar school he had spent years in felt like a maze now, designed to trap them. When they reached the library doors, Ryan felt a flicker of relief. He pushed them open, the hinges whining as the three of them slipped inside. The vast room stretched out before them, the moonlight casting pale silver beams across the carpet. The rows of books towered above, their spines gleaming dully in the half-light. Caleb clicked the flashlight back on, sweeping the beam across the shelves. "There," he said, pointing toward the glowing red exit sign at the far end. Ryan exhaled in shaky relief, his body loosening just slightly. But before they could move, a noise cut through the silence, a chair dragging slowly across the floor somewhere deeper in the library. The sound was unmistakable. Long, grating, deliberate. Dylan's knees buckled, and he whispered hoarsely, "No one's supposed to be here." The flashlight beam darted across the room, but the chairs and tables were still, untouched. The sound came again, closer this time, as if whoever, or whatever, was dragging it wanted them to hear. Ryan felt goosebumps rise along his arms, the tiny hairs prickling as the noise stopped abruptly. The silence afterward was almost worse than the sound itself. Then, from between the shelves, something shifted. A tall, dark figure leaned out just enough for its head to tilt unnaturally, like a puppet dangling from strings. The flashlight beam barely grazed it before it withdrew again, retreating into the shadows. Ryan's legs moved on their own. "Go," he shouted, his voice cracking as he sprinted toward the exit sign. Caleb and Dylan followed, the flashlight bouncing wildly in Caleb's hand. Behind them, the sound of hurried footsteps pounded against the floor, matching their frantic pace. Ryan didn't dare look back this time. He reached the exit door, shoved it hard, and stumbled into the night air. The heavy door slammed shut behind them, leaving them gasping on the pavement, their bodies trembling as if they'd just escaped drowning. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Their ragged breathing filled the night, and Ryan's mind spun with disbelief. We all saw that, right?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. Caleb nodded mutely, his hand clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. Dylan dropped to the curb, burying his face in his hands. "That wasn't a prank," he muttered, his voice shaking. "That wasn't kids messing around. Something's in there." Ryan glanced back at the dark school building, its windows gleaming coldly under the moon. The thought clawed at his brain, refusing to let go. Whatever they had seen hadn't wanted them there. It had warned them, written right on the chalkboard. "Don't stay." And yet, something in the way those doors had opened on their own, in the way the shadow had chased them, made him wonder if leaving had been enough, or if they had just taken whatever it was with them. Ryan tried to steady his shaking hands as they piled into Dylan's car, slamming the doors shut as if that thin layer of metal and glass could protect them from what had just chased them out of the school. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing through the dark, and Dylan floored it out of the parking lot without a word. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by their uneven breaths and the hum of tires against asphalt. Ryan kept glancing into the side mirror, half expecting to see something sprinting after them in the darkness. But the lot remained empty, the school building receding into a shadowy outline against the moonlit sky. They didn't stop driving until they reached a gas station 10 minutes away, the fluorescent lights bathing them in a harsh, sterile glow that felt almost safe. Caleb jumped out first, pacing back and forth like he was trying to shake the image of what they'd seen. Dylan leaned against the steering wheel, muttering curses under his breath. Ryan followed them out, his mind still racing. "We can't just pretend that didn't happen," he said, his voice cracking. "We all saw it. That thing." Caleb spun around, his eyes wide and frantic. "Saw what, Ryan? A shadow? A noise? That chalkboard? We don't even know what it was." He rubbed his hands over his face, trembling. But whatever it wasn't normal. Dylan finally lifted his head, his face pale and sweaty. "It followed us," he whispered, his voice low enough that Ryan almost didn't catch it. "In the library. That wasn't some prank. It knew we were there. It wanted us to know." His words hung in the air, heavier than the humid night around them. Ryan's gut twisted. He wanted to argue, to tell them it was just nerves, just adrenaline making them see things. But deep down, he couldn't. Because when he closed his eyes, he saw the way that figure had tilted its head, the way the doors had opened on their own, the words scrawled on the board, "Don't stay." That wasn't imagination. That was real. He leaned against the car, pressing his palms into the cool metal, and whispered, "We should have listened." The boys decided to crash at Dylan's place, too shaken to split up and go home alone. His parents were out of town, which felt like a blessing and a curse. They tried to distract themselves, video games, snacks, even blasting music, but no one could focus. Every creak of the house, every rattle of the pipes made them all glance at each other nervously. By 2 a.m, they gave up pretending everything was fine and set up sleeping bags in the living room, leaving the lights on. Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the lamp casting faint shadows on the walls. His body was exhausted, but his mind buzzed, replaying the night in a loop. Just as he began to drift into a restless half-sleep, he heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. His eyes flew open, and he held his breath, straining to listen. It came again, louder this time, from the front door. Ryan sat up slowly, his stomach twisting, and looked at Caleb and Dylan. They were both awake, staring wide-eyed at the same sound. None of them spoke as the scratching continued, steady and deliberate, moving higher up the door like something climbing. Dylan mouthed, "Don't open it," his face pale. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a slow knock. 3 loud, hollow thuds that reverberated through the house. Ryan's skin crawled. No one should have been outside at this hour. Dylan grabbed his phone with trembling hands, checking the time. 3:07 a.m. Caleb whispered, "Maybe it's just some drunk guy." But even he didn't sound convinced. The knocking came again, harder this time, rattling the door in its frame. Ryan's chest tightened as he stared at the door. The porch light should have illuminated whoever was standing there, but through the frosted glass, there was nothing, just darkness. Suddenly, every lamp in the living room flickered. The TV screen crackled to life for a split second before shutting off again, plunging them into dimness. The scratching started up once more, but now it was coming from inside the walls. Caleb shouted, scrambling to his feet, while Dylan dropped his phone in shock. The sound raced around them, circling, as though whatever had been outside was now moving through the house itself. Ryan felt the air grow cold, his breath fogging faintly in front of him. Then, just as quickly as it began, it stopped. The room was silent again, the only sound their ragged breathing. Dylan picked up his phone with shaking hands, whispering, "We should have never gone back in that school." Ryan's eyes darted toward the window, his pulse pounding. Because pressed against the glass, just for a second before vanishing, was the same tilted shadowy head they had seen in the library, watching them from the outside. Ryan didn't sleep at all. None of them did. They huddled together in the living room, the lamp buzzing faintly above them, waiting for the first sign of daylight to bleed through the curtains. Every sound outside made them jump, the groan of the wind, the occasional passing car, but nothing returned after that shadowy face vanished from the window. By the time the sun finally rose, they were pale, hollow-eyed, and wired with a dread that didn't fade with the daylight. Dylan's parents weren't due back until Monday, and Caleb immediately suggested they leave the house and go crash at his place instead. The idea of staying in Dylan's house another night was unbearable. They gathered their things hastily, none of them mentioning the scratches etched faintly into the inside of the front door, though Ryan noticed them before they left. Long, uneven marks that hadn't been there before. His gut twisted, but he said nothing. By the time they got to Caleb's house, the illusion of safety returned somewhat. His mom bustled around the kitchen making pancakes, his little sister watched cartoons in the living room, and for a moment Ryan almost convinced himself it had been some kind of shared hallucination, born from teenage stupidity and too much adrenaline. But then he caught Caleb's eye across the table and saw the same haunted look in them that he felt in his own. They knew better. That evening, Caleb's mom left for work, she was a nurse on the night shift, and his sister went to a friend's house for a sleepover. The three boys found themselves alone again, trying to convince themselves that they weren't waiting for something to happen. Ryan sat on the couch, fidgeting with his phone, when Dylan spoke up. "We should tell someone," he said flatly. "A teacher, the cops, somebody needs to know what's in that school." Caleb frowned, shaking his head. "And say what?" "Hey, officer, we broke into our high school after hours and now we're being haunted by something we can't describe. They'd laugh us out of the station. Or worse, call our parents." Ryan leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "What if it doesn't matter what we tell them? What if it's not about the school anymore? What if it followed us here?" His voice cracked on the last word, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. Dylan shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the curtained window. "You saw it at the glass last night too, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Ryan nodded without looking up. Caleb muttered, "So what do we do? Just wait around until it decides it's done with us." Before Ryan could answer, a soft thud echoed from upstairs. They all froze. The sound came again, heavier this time, like footsteps moving across the hallway. Caleb shot to his feet, pale. "No one's supposed to be here," he whispered. Dylan grabbed the nearest thing he could find for defense, a fireplace poker, clutching it so tightly his knuckles turned white. Ryan forced himself to stand, his knees weak. They moved toward the staircase together, each step creaking beneath their weight as the sound of footsteps above continued, slow and deliberate. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched dark and silent, the bedroom doors cracked slightly open. Caleb's hand shook as he pushed the door to his room wider, the hinges groaning. Nothing. Just his bed, his desk, his posters. They checked the other rooms one by one, each empty, until they reached the guest room at the end of the hall. The door was closed tight. Ryan swallowed hard, his hand hovering over the knob. The others stood behind him, silent. Slowly, he twisted the handle. The door opened with a loud click. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. At first, it looked empty too, until Ryan's eyes adjusted. There, in the corner, was a shape. A tall, shadowed figure, bent slightly forward, its head cocked at the same unnatural angle they'd seen before. The air in the room dropped instantly, their breaths visible in the dimness. Caleb let out a strangled noise, stumbling back. Dylan swung the poker wildly, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Then, in a voice that wasn't human, low, layered, and vibrating, it spoke. "You shouldn't have stayed." The words rattled through Ryan's bones, his stomach lurching violently. The lights flickered, and in that split second of darkness, the figure vanished. When the bulb steadied again, the room was empty. The boys bolted down the stairs, their panic exploding. They ran out the front door into the evening air, collapsing onto the lawn, gasping and shaking. Ryan's vision blurred with terror and disbelief. He knew, without a doubt, that their lives would never be the same. Whatever they had disturbed in that school hadn't just warned them. It had claimed them.